Nami! I gotta talk about Nami. I gotta talk about Nami. I also gotta talk about Chopper, who is over there as well. So today is the second half of the Straw Hat Separation serial discussion videos. And this one is going to be going over what happens to Chopper, Nami, Brook, and Zoro. Well, they are all separated from each other and on the various islands that they land on. And a bunch of fun stuff like that. So, we start with Chopper, since he's the first one that we see where they land. And it's Chopper's, "I'm not food, you a-holes," or "I'm not food, you jerks." So Chopper's whole setup is that he ends up landing on the Torino Kingdom in the South Blue. And he wakes up and he is just surrounded by these giant birds. The Torino birds is what they're called. Torino basically is like Kingdom of the Giant Birds, is essentially what the translation is. You may hear a weed cutter in the background, or an edge trimmer in the background. My neighbor is doing that right now. I don't know. I can hear it. I don't know if you can. I apologize. It's that time of year. And so this is where Chopper lands after being sent there by Kuma. And he wakes up and he ends up kind of getting semi-attacked by the birds. He manages to escape and avoid being eaten. And then at some point he manages to hide while the natives of the island, the more heavier set natives that we see there, while they fight the birds on the island. There's a couple of things that happen. This is one of the ones that gets a bit more expanded upon in the anime. Chopper ends up taking care of a little baby chick of the birds that ends up being hurt, and he ends up caring for it and, kind of nursing it back to health. And then eventually parents of said birds show up. Chopper gets kind of knocked away by them. And then we get into kind of what happens during like the post-war arc. So what ended up happening is at some point during all of this, Chopper ended up getting captured by the natives of the island. And then they tie him up and are hanging him over a pot, getting ready to drop him into a stock pot to boil him and make raccoon soup, or tanuki soup, depending on how you want to put it. And, of course, Chopper does not like it when he is confused for a tanuki, so of course he's angry about that. Transforms, are like, okay, maybe he's not a tanuki. And then we have the cute bit where Chopper's butt gets burned, and then the natives are like, okay, maybe he's not something we want to eat. He talks, and he can change. And they give him the salve, and Chopper is very interested in this. And then Chopper ends up finding out that there's a bunch of people on the island that are very sick. And he finds out that there's kind of this, little skirmishy war. Excuse me, I have to adjust the camera. Little skirmishy war happening between the human inhabitants of the island and the birds of the island. And Chopper kind of volunteers to kind of be like, so what exactly is the problem? What are you fighting over? And the human's perspective is there is this plant at the top that grows up by where the birds live in the trees. And it's an herbal plant. They need it to make medicine, and they need it for the medicine to help cure the people who are sick. And of course, Chopper being a doctor, he of course wants to help with this. And of course, we're going to find out later that this island has a lot of medical knowledge. So that's fun. But what ends up happening is Chopper kind of goes with the humans in their attempt to go up and try to get the herbs. And of course, the humans think that the birds are protecting the herbs. And there ends up being this whole setup where, Chopper ends up communicating with them and determining that, okay, the birds are not going after the plants. That's not what they're protecting. The birds are protecting their gold because they're birds and they like shiny things like magpies and crows and things like that. And they go out and they find shipwrecks and they gather up the treasure from the shipwrecks. They take it with them back to the island and they use it to make nests for their young. Because shiny, sparkly things to make the small baby birds happy. Small baby birds are still very large. And so they find out that, oh, that's what they're doing. And the natives are like, well, we don't want any of the gold. That's not what we value here. We want the herbs and the plants and stuff like that. So Chopper essentially uses his ability, since he can talk to animals, to translate between the two. And when he kind of gets knocked out at some point in time, and when he wakes up, it's essentially like what happens at the end of How to Train Your Dragon, where Hiccup wakes up and now there's dragons all over the place at Berk. It's Chopper wakes up and he walks outside and he sees the humans and the birds interacting peacefully instead of attacking each other, and like the humans are like giving the birds gold, and then the birds are giving them like, you know, the plants and stuff like that so they can use it to make the medicine to help heal the people who are sick. So Chopper kind of helps with, you know, figuring up that language barrier and communication barrier. And now the humans and the birds are now much more peaceful with each other, which is very good for this island. From there, Chopper ends up, of course, getting the news coup, and he's like, oh my god, and he reads about like what happened at Marineford with Luffy and Ace and all of that. And he's like, okay, well, I need to get back to Sabaody. So one of the giant birds, in the anime, it's the parent of the chick that he helped, takes him, is trying to get, you know, is flying him back towards Sabaody. How the bird can find Sabaody is beyond me, but Chopper has the Viver card for Rayleigh, so they're able to follow that. So what ends up happening is, on the way towards Sabaody, Chopper ends up getting the news coup about Luffy praying at Marineford and all of that. So Chopper, you know, gets the 3D2Y message and is just like, okay, I guess I have to go back to the village, to the kingdom, the Torino kingdom, and become stronger. But he feels uncomfortable returning so soon after they gave him this, you know, very nice goodbye and everything. So he puts on the disguise of Chopper Mask. The natives just instantly recognize him because, you know, he'd be pretty easily recognized. It's like how pretty much all the Straw Hats recognized Usopp right off the bat when he was disguised as Sogeking. As much as, you know, I still partially believe that both Luffy and Chopper knew that it was Usopp, but they wanted to play along to make Usopp feel better, or they figured it out pretty quickly and wanted to play along with that. To be fair, it's also Luffy and Usopp, so they probably never figured it out. You know, whatever. And what ends up happening is, of course, so Chopper returns to the island as Chopper Mask. They recognize him. He just kind of gets annoyed by that. And then they end up taking him into their library area. And, you know, Chopper ends up learning that they have all of this medical knowledge on this island. And, of course, we learn later that the reason Chopper got sent to this island is because, of course, Kuma came to this island like he came to all of the other islands that the Straw Hats end up on, looking for information about a cure for Bonnie. This island was known for their medical stuff. They're very sad that they can't help Bonnie, but, you know, Kuma makes a note of it, and he sends, why do I keep thinking Usopp? Sends Chopper here because he's the ship's doctor, and it would give him the ability to do a ton of research here. So Chopper is just, like, amazed by all of this stuff. And he also recalls them using mechanical weapons. So, you know, because they have, like, the locals have, like, the natives of the island have, like, these, like, mechanical spears that they use. So they've got, like, some technology, but they don't seem to be as technologically advanced as some of the other areas that we've been to. Either from where the Straw Hats are from or places that they've been to up to that point. And the natives seem fine with it. They are connected to the outside world in the fact that they get the newspapers and stuff like that, and that they have had visitors, and that they probably have people come by every now and then. But the Torino birds probably do a good job at keeping away anybody who tries to hurt them, particularly now that the birds and the humans get along with each other. Because, of course, the birds don't want bad pirates coming to the island and trying to take their gold. trying to take their shiny collections. And the humans don't want pirates to attack the island because that's not good for them. So the birds and the humans can work together to protect the island. And now that will also include protecting a lot of this medical knowledge. Side note, we don't know how far back this medical knowledge goes. We don't know how long the Torino Kingdom has been around. Given other information that we've seen, in regards to, that we've gotten much more recently with like, the rising sea levels and stuff like that, it could be that, and like Torino Kingdom is like very similar to Elbath in the fact that it's a giant tree that has different levels with different areas where different people are living on it. So there's similarities there with Elbath. So, and they have like this a bunch of ancient knowledge. Elbath has a bunch of ancient knowledge. I'm not saying that Torino is like they have giant animals, which of course Elbath has giant animals. I'm not saying that Torino is a full-on, reference to Elbath, but it's like, they're kind of similar. So that's where Chopper spends the next 2 years. He trains in how to, use more, this medical knowledge, improve his own medical knowledge. He also improves his rumble balls and his transformation abilities and everything else like that. So he's able to do that. He learns how to control his monster point, all that stuff. For then when he heads back to Sabaody after the end of the 2 years. Now we get to talk about Nami. Nami is my favorite Straw Hat. So, Nami's is Nami's weather report. So, Nami ends up on Witheria. So, a couple of things happen. Nami ends up on Witheria, where she ends up, landing there and is kind of, found passed out on the ground in like the paw print shape, like all of the Straw Hats where they all end up in the paw print shape on the ground. And most of them are kind of passed out by the time they get there. And Nami wakes up, or Nami is found by a weather wizard, Hardus, who takes her back to his little home on Witheria. And, she wakes up there and he's, she's like, who the heck are you? Because he's like very much in her face. Because that is just how Hardus is. And, he's very much in her face. And she punches him and yells at him and all of that stuff. Because, personal boundaries, personal space there, bud. And, Nami ends up finding out that she's on Witheria. And then he also ends up demonstrating like the weather knot, which of course now kind of is called back to, or called forward to, in regards to like, Joy Boy's Emmett hockey knot that we had on Egghead. So we have like the weather knot and him showing her the wind knot for how it like ties wind into a knot. Still no explanation about how that works. So Nami is very interested in that. Nami is very interested about a bunch of this other stuff. Well, she's kind of unamused and she takes her frustration out on him. And then later on, they end up going down to the surface world, where Hardus is trying to make a deal with the people who live on this island that are having a very bad drought to make it rain, and Nami kind of helps with the negotiations there. This is one of the cover pages that we see. And Hardus in the cover pages is much taller than Hardus in the anime. For some reason, they made him a lot shorter in the anime. I don't know why, but they did. But like Nami kind of helps with like him bargaining with the citizens, because he's like, I think he's like way overcharging them, and Nami can tell that these people don't have money, and as much as Nami is willing to scam people out of their money when they have money, she also knows what it's like to not have money and see people who are in a desperate situation, so she, kind of helps with that. Because Hardus, as much as he does love studying weather, he's not as good at dealing with regular people. So then we get into the post-war, where Nami is, of course, getting the information about what happened at Marineford with Luffy and Ace and all of this stuff. And she tries to steal a bunch of the experiments and information that they have on Witheria, because she's like, oh, I can use this stuff. And it's kind of like a slapdash plan. And this is coming from Nami, who usually likes to plan things out fairly well, plan things out fairly well or plan things on the fly, depending on the circumstances. And she has gathered up a bunch of this weather equipment and the information and everything else like that. Hasn't really learned that much about it. And she tries to escape. Unfortunately, she is caught and imprisoned by a bunch of the other weather scientists that are on Witheria. And, they lock her up in, like, the bubble prison thing. And Hardus comes along and is just like, what is going on here? And A, Nami punches him through the bubble because he got way too close. B, she points at the newspaper and is explaining as she breaks down sobbing, that the boy in the newspaper, that Straw Hat Luffy is her captain, and that his brother just died, and that she needs to get to him so that way she can help him. And she's just like, she's, crying and everything for all the sympathy and the pain and everything else like that Luffy must be going through. And the scientists fall hook, line, and sinker for this. And they let her out of the prison. She then pretends reveals it's a ruse, grabs Hardus, taking him hostage, and is running away. And while they're running, she notes that Luffy has always been there to support the crew to the best of his ability during their darkest hours, and now it's their time to return the favor, to support him. And she's, like, carrying Hardus as she's running, and he's, like, looking up at her, and he notes that her fake tears are still flowing, prompting Nami to blush and then snap back at him. So this is, of course, a full setup of the fact that, like, Nami is very good at doing, like, the crocodile tears and stuff like that. She's very good at fake crying when she needs to garner sympathy, or to lull someone into a false sense of security before stealing from them or attacking them or some variation. So Nami's very good at that. She had to develop those skills as a thief and be under Arlong and everything else like that. But I don't think those were fake tears. She genuinely is upset about what happened with Ace. She met Ace. She's upset that he died. She is sad and upset that Luffy has now lost his brother, and that he was there for when it happened and all of that stuff. So she is genuinely upset about that. But she's also very able to, like, turn off the tears when she needs to. And then, of course, the fact that she's still crying when she's running with Hardus notes that they are not fake tears. So then, of course, we end up getting it that Nami ends up getting the other information in the newspaper about Luffy praying at Marineford. And she's like, okay, so I need to figure out what to do. She's, like, trying to decide what she wants to do. She ends up wanting to study at Witheria with Hardus. Unfortunately, she ends up getting captured by the other scientists again, and they try to reprimand her. And she uses her crocodile tears, literally crocodile tears this time, her fake ones, so what Nami essentially does is she does this whole act where she's like, very well, I have deceived you, blah, 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 blah. I shall now jump off of these clouds on the Sky Island and fall to my death. And she, does the whole thing, and she's, like, running towards the edge of the island. And then the scientists, the weather wizards, are, like, chasing after her, like, no, come back, we're sorry. And then, like, they're like, sorry, you can stay, it's okay. And then she just stops, and they fall. They end up being fine. We see them later. But then she's like, okay, fine, thank you, bye. And then she goes off with Hardus so she can start studying the weather. So from there, we have it that Nami, she forgave them, and she's like, okay, I want a house to live in. And they assumedly give her a house. And then she starts learning from Hardus a bunch of information. Because, of course, Hardus has been studying the weather all over the One Piece world for the past 40, 50-something years, 60-something years, something like that. He's, like, in his 90s. He's, like, the oldest living human that's not Kureha in this story. Um, and what ends up happening is, of course, so she's starting to study through all of that stuff, looking through a bunch of information about like the weather in the New World, very strange weather that happens in the New World on the Grand Line. And she's, of course, learning about like the weather balls and the weather eggs and a bunch of this other stuff. And she is just very interested in all of it. And she decides that she is going to learn all of this stuff so that way she can use it to help her reckless captain. And of course, she's just like reminiscing because like the part of this is like all of the Straw Hats are like reminiscing about like all of their time with Luffy. And of course, part of the thing about like the Straw Hat separation thing and like all of them being separated for the 2 years is that they end up spending more time with the people who they are with on those various islands than they have with their actual crew. And like Zoro has been around Luffy the longest, and he spends, and we'll get to Zoro, but he spends more time around Mihawk and Perona than he has with the rest of the Straw Hats, which is just like that. You know, like Brook has known the Straw Hats for like maybe 2 weeks at this point in time when all of this happens, and you know, we're gonna get to Brook in a second, but like he still is like, no, I'm gonna go back to the Straw Hats, I'm gonna go back to Luffy because he is my captain and blah 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 blah. But like they all spend more time with the people that they are with during the 2-year time skip, 2-year training time skip, than they have with their actual crew, which just shows like how strong those bonds are. Because like, you know, because Robin spends more time with like Koala and Sabo and Hack than she has with the rest of the Straw Hats, and like she's just like, no, I'm gonna go back to the Straw Hats. That's where I belong, and she's not wrong, and they're fine with it. All these people end up being fine with the fact that their individual people want to go back to their crew because those are their friends and their nakama, but they also build these bonds while they're here, and of course Nami ends up learning so much about, you know, the weather and the, you know, stuff in the New World and a bunch of other stuff. And of course, during that whole time frame, she, you know, upgrades her Climatact and everything. For when she finally returns to Sabaody and everything after the 2-year time skip. And of course, she wants to use it to make weapons, and Hardus is just like dismayed by that, which is just funny. Although they end up helping her make the weapons, so that's fun there. Now we get into Brook. So, fun bit for Brook here. So, Brook's is lodgings and panty repayment. Brook's lodgings and panting repayment. So, essentially, Brook ends up landing on, it's called Namakura Island, or the country of like, Haratenara. It's like Hungaria or something like that. It's like, because it's like the very hungry kingdom because all the citizens there are starving. And we get to this island, and it's this bunch of people who are essentially performing some type of a ritual for who knows how long. They've been performing this ritual, and they are trying to summon Satan. Yeah, because that's always a great idea. So many comics and manga have started off with someone being like, I'm going to try to summon the devil. That'll be a good idea. I can make a deal with them. Yeah. And, you know, the thing is that, like, Brook is, like, the Straw Hat that Kuma knows the least about, because he's at least kind of been able to, like, kind of study the way that the other Straw Hats are and able to send them to good places. For them to train. Brook is kind of that exception where it's like, well, he's a musician, I guess, but I don't even know if Kuma knew that much yet about him. And, you know, so Kuma, there's either Kuma was trying to send Brook somewhere else, or he was trying to send him to Hungaria, but he, like, either he was sending him there or he was trying to send him somewhere else, and somehow the magic devil worship circle pentagram thing that they made somehow interfered with that and pulled Brook in. Because, as we have now seen in the story, abyss marks and things like that, the abyss circle and different things like that, clearly have some type of connection clearly are able to do something. We've seen the God's Knights use them. We have seen the Gorosei use them. We have seen Imu use them. So we know that they have some type of power. And while this pentagram thing that they made, the summoning circle thing that they made, is clearly not 100% what it's supposed to be, it may have had some ability to connect with what Kuma did and pull Brook in, or it's just complete and utter coincidence, and that's just where where Kuma was going to send him anyway. So Brook has this great entrance where he lands and stands up, and he's just got all of this like smoke coming off of him, and he's kind of glowing, and they're all just like, "Oh my god, I think it worked!" Because they're like, "Oh my god, we summoned Satan! Yay!" And we get into this whole bit where like they're explaining to Brook that there are just, they're prepared to lose their souls to Satan in exchange for revenge against the Long Arm tribe because they're so, their island has been attacked so many times by the Long Arm tribe. And where's Namakura Island? I don't think they ever say specifically where it is in the world, but they have, they're like, that they've been attacking us relentlessly and taking our food and everything else like that. And we have nothing left. So we try to do this thing to summon you. So Satan, can you help us? So they keep calling Brook Satan, which is just funny. And what ends up happening is, he kind of ignores them because he wants to get back to the rest of his crew. However, when he does see this frightened girl that's there, that's like the lone girl in their group, he does ask to see her panties. And he does decide to help. But it's all the guys lifting up their, like, tunics, their robes, and, like, showing him their underwear. Okay, we get that. And, they start showing Brook their panties, which is just hilarious. Brook kind of agrees, he's just, like, shocked by this, by what's going on. He's like, okay, this is just weird. So what ends up happening is this essentially results in, like, Brook they've explained to Brook what's going on. And then the girl ends up getting kidnapped by members of the Long Arm tribe. So he does decide to help. He ends up writing this song. And he ends up writing a new song for the cultists. And they think that they're supposed to be, like, magic talismans at first. So they just kind of, like, slap them up around the town after Brook gives them to him. But he's like, no, it's a song. And he pulls it out and he starts playing it for them. They think Brook's going to fight, and he ends up composing a new piece of music instead and everything. And they keep showing, please and offering in their underwear, which is not something that Brook wants. Yeah. And so we have a bunch of that. And he ends up singing, and that encourages the cultists to stand up for themselves. So that way, when the Long Arms return, they are able to capture the Long Arms, rescue the girl that had been captured, and then they, and rescue the other villagers that had been kidnapped. And so we have, that kind of going on there. And of course, we know that a lot of Brook's power comes from his music. He is able to use his, so many of his attacks are based on music or named after music, different things like that. And of course, Brook is just an amazing musician anyway, to the point where his music can affect the souls and the hearts of the people around him. We've seen that multiple times throughout the course of the series. And Brook kind of, using his music to encourage them is kind of similar to what Billow Betty does with her Pump Pump Fruit. So there's some connection, bit of a reference there. But then there's also this kind of concept where a lot of the times there were, musical sections of a military or of a fighting band of some point in kind, a military band that would play in order to, like, rally the troops or rile them up or something like that to, like, bolster them and stuff, different things like that. So there's, some connections that, some calls to real history there. And of course, a lot of times music is used in, celebrations of winning the battle or something like that. So Brook helps the cultists. They Um, um, Brooke kind of explains to them that no god or devil would help them if they do not do things themselves, if they don't even try to protect themselves. And Brooke's mind is just kind of somewhat else. His mind is kind of elsewhere at this point in time because he is like thinking about what happened with Luffy at Marineford and everything else like that, but he still wanted to help the people. And he's just like very determined to try to get back to them. So, while they're celebrating, Brooke goes over and he like uses his, Satan persona essentially to try to scare the Long Arms so they won't attack the village ever again. And they agree, and they're set free. And then they immediately turn around, grab Brooke, and kidnap him and run off. Because they're going to sell him off to some freak show because he's a talking, walking skeleton with an afro. And after this, the cultists just immediately decide to go back to the summoning circle and try, instead of trying to help Brooke themselves, they're just like, oh, our Satan skeleton that liked panties got kidnapped. Well, let's go summon another one. And like that's what they head off to go to. So Brooke is captured by the Long Arm tribe and taken back to their island, Kenton Island, where they have their kingdom. And they're trying to show off Brooke as this, this freak of nature. To be fair, he is a freak of nature. Love Brooke, but he is a freak of nature. And, so they're going through and doing that. And Brooke, of course, gets his hands on the newspaper and he reads about Luffy at Marineford, praying at Marineford and all of that stuff. So he's like, okay. And he gets the 3D2Y message. He's like, okay, so I need to, what am I going to do? And essentially what ends up happening is Brooke decides that he will better himself until it's time to go back. And he tries to train himself more. He wanted to try to do a better ability of doing his degree bends that he does because reasons. And then he decides instead he's going to work on his musical ability, goes into working on his fighting ability as well. And he takes out a guitar and he starts to perform this new song, his Bone to Be Wild, as the Long Arms just kind of look on at this ship. Just kind of look on as Brooke starts playing. And of course, we know that this leads into over the time skip, Brooke becomes this huge musical sensation all over the world and super popular, ends up doing like a tour that of course ends at Sabaody, so that way he's able to join the others and everything else like that. And the Long Arm guys that captured him in the first place become his managers essentially. And they don't like it when he leaves later. So fair. I mean, yeah. So we have that. So now we get into Zoro. So Zoro's is where the hell are they? And what a pain in the ass. So, Zoro is, of course, I think he's the first one to get sent flying. So he's like the last one that we see for where he ended up. And Zoro ended up on Kuragana Island. Now, Kuragana Island, we end up finding out, is the same place that Kuma sent Perona way back, not way back, but back in Thriller Bark. He sent, popped Perona away to her dream island. That's creepy. And castle. Hey, girl, you got your answer. Kuma pops her away there. So Perona has already been there for a while. And she ends up finding Zoro very badly injured, and she ends up bandaging him. Bandaging him up and everything, because she's very lonely. And she bandages him up. In the anime, she bandages him into makes him into a giant kumashi variant of a bandage thing, which is just funny. And he tries to get his swords, she refuses to give them to him, which is just funny. So eventually Perona relents, returns his swords, gets his just regular bandaged up and everything like that. And Zoro is going about on the island, and they end up coming across an unknown swordsman. So when we cut back into this post-war. We see Zoro and Perona, and it is revealed that the swordsman that he ended up finding was not a swordsman at all, that it is actually a feral baboon known as a humandrill. And of course, we find out later that these baboons have been living on this island. These humandrills have been living on this island for a long time, and they mimic humans. And because the humans went to war on the island and killed each other, the humandrills picked upon that same, fighting and everything else like that. So now they just want to fight anything that comes near them. Turns out to be Zoro is the thing that comes near them. They end up also learning that this island is the home of Dracul Mihawk. So yeah, there, who is returning from everything that happened at Marineford and gets to there and be like, who are you and why are you on my island? Wait a second, don't I know you? Who's the pink girl? And so they end up meeting Mihawk. And of course, Zoro is just angry about this because he is not ready to fight Mihawk again. And we get a bunch of this stuff where, Mihawk, gave him a small boat so he can leave the island. Unfortunately, the boat gets destroyed by the humandrills. Also, Zoro would have just probably drowned at sea at some point in time because Zoro cannot navigate to save his life. And Mihawk ends up eventually going to the ruins to watch Zoro fight the humandrills because Zoro does end up fighting the humandrills. And there's a bunch of various things that happened. I think we end up having Perona ask Mihawk about some of the information about what happened to Moria because he was there, and she's of course under the impression that Moria died at Marineford, so she doesn't really have anywhere else to go. And so, and Zoro was out trying to deal with the humandrills so that way he can try to leave. And, he's still very badly injured because Zoro at this time is, of course, still very badly injured from what happened at Thriller Bark, from all of the damage that he incurred from taking the pain bubble Kuma made from Luffy, and Zoro took that. And then, of course, he's not fully healed, and of course, he still got into a fight with the pacifista and stuff on Saba Odi, so he's still definitely not healed from all of that. So it's incurred damage that he hasn't fully healed from yet, and other wounds. And so Zoro is, of course, badly injured while he's still trying to fight the humandrills and everything. Zoro is just very determined to try to get off the island. And eventually Zoro ends up getting hurt. And, Perona is, holding up the newspaper above him for Zoro to read because he's just so badly hurt he can't lift up the newspaper himself to read it. And Zoro is the one who kind of takes the longest to find the clue about the 3D2Y. He's like, I know there has to be a clue here, as he's reading about, Luffy at the Oxbell and everything. And he does eventually figure out that it's okay, we're going to, instead of rejoining in 3 days, it's going to be 2 years. Okay, now I need to figure out how to train. When Zoro next shows up in the castle on Kurogana Island with Mihawk there, Zoro is on his knees and he's doing the whole bowing and everything and, prostrating himself before Mihawk and requesting that the warlord train him, requesting that Mihawk train him. And Mihawk dismisses this request, thinking that Zoro is just doing this because he's unable to defeat the humandrills on the island. So he chides Zoro and expresses regret for overestimating the swordsman, way back in East Blue. And of course, that's not why Zoro is doing this. So Zoro explains that he has defeated all of the humandrills on the island, but he wants to be trained by Mihawk because Mihawk defeated him, and that the warlord reconsiders this because it is literally Zoro putting aside his pride as a swordsman, his dream, in order to support Luffy's dream, which is one of those great moments here that we have here. It is Zoro just putting all of his stock in Luffy and being I need you to train me. because I am clearly not strong enough. I have seen that based on what happened at Thriller Bark and what happened at Sabaody and what just happened at Marineford. I am not strong enough, and I need you to help train me. And Mihawk sees this, and like Mihawk has interacted with Luffy, and he just saw what Luffy went through at Marineford in order to try to save Ace and everything else like that. And Mihawk kind of has a bit of an idea of the kind of person that Luffy is. So Mihawk relents, and he looks at Perona and he's like, patch him up, patch up Zoro, and we can begin the training. And I think Perona asks if, I think at some point Perona and Mihawk figure out the message anyway of like, okay, well, I guess we got to put up with this guy for 2 years. Okay, whatever. That works fine. Zoro is like, describes it, the message and everything else like that. And he's like, okay. So from there's also a moment in the anime that they added in with the Humandrils where like Zoro goes out and has to fight like the biggest, baddest Humandril on the island that has like a bigger copy of like Yoru, which is just funny. It's like a nice big version of Yoru. Zoro has to defeat that Humandril, which is just funny. So that's just fun interactions there. But Mihawk does keep his word. We know that Mihawk keeps his word. He trains Zoro. In how to use observation and armament haki, kind of forces him to learn how to use it by being like, you can't have alcohol until you learn how to do this. Zoro, what? It's like it's exactly like how Rayleigh like was depriving Luffy of food until he, managed to, start learning haki and learning observation and armament haki and stuff like that. So so Zoro spends that time training, and that kind of finishes up what we have here for the cover page series. As I said, this ties into, of course, what we end up seeing, for the, pre-time skip, finishing up that for like where all the Straw Hats end up, and all of them end up training and becoming so much stronger and everything. And then, of course, they are all reunited at Sabaody 2 years later and continue with the story. So that's what I have here. I thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you have a nice rest of your day. Bye.